So we are at around 416. Yeah. So without going, I think, into too detailed of 415 and about the sravakas and all of that. In the notes that Sobish provides for 415, I think one of the key things you want to pay attention or notice is that in the many discussions in the, especially in the Mahayana traditions as developed in Nalanda University and later inherited by the Tibetan scholars, as I say, all the differences and all the disagreements and all the debates that occurred earlier on among the various Buddhist groups, finally at Nalanda, what they did is that they basically, you could say, neutralized all the disagreements and came up with a comprehensive way of looking at things. Yeah? So what were probably at one time rather uncharitable, so to say, insults that people were hurling at each other, and then primarily like the Mahayana people hurling it at the Hinayana people and say, oh, your arhats and sravakas are stupid, And indeed, probably when people got very got very involved in those disagreements and arguments, those kinds of words were exchanged. On the so-called Hinayana side, what they were hurling at the Mahayana is that you guys are, fake news, so to say. You come up with new sutras and you claim that the Buddha taught this. This is all bogus. You made it all up. So by the time of Nalanda, all of this was kind of neutralized and harmonized into a full, a comprehensive system, which says that, actually, the intent or the interpretations, they all are somewhat right if you understand the context, and that there are no disagreements in the end. So once they forward this idea that there's no disagreement, right, then you have to explain away the seeming disagreements. And one of that would be, how does the way that the Hinayana folks talk about the attainment of the path according to the Arhat ideal, stream entrant, once returner, non-returner, finally Arhat, how do you qualify that in relation to Mahayana focus on the bodhisattva's progress, which is sometimes discussed in terms of the 5 paths and sometimes discussed in terms of the 10 levels or the 10 bhumis. So even the 5 paths and the 10 bhumis belong in a way to different ways of articulating the progress of bodhisattvas. And even there within the Mahayana, so to say, there needs to be kind of reconciling these two. And then furthermore, when you add the Arhats, the Hinayana, so-called Hinayana's traditions of charting out the Arhats' progress, then you got to bring all of these together and say, this corresponds with this corresponds with this corresponds with that, right? So, so then in doing that work, not surprisingly, different opinions would arise in terms of, what is the level of attainment, say someone who is a stream entrant, so now based on the so-called Hinayana discussion of stages of awakening. So some say someone attains stream entrance. Well, what would that be on the bodhisattva scale? In other words, you have different scales, right? And so you say, if this person is at level 2 of this scale, what does it correspond with on this scale? And if somebody is on this scale, what does it correspond with on this scale? So that's partly what's going on here. In the Mahayana discussions about this, eventually it seems like one way to talk about these scales is they will talk about, well, even in looking at these scales, you can say level of realization is one scale, degree of qualities is another scale. So they articulate like you can measure or you can evaluate someone by looking at the level of their realization and the level of how many qualities they have developed. So now we're back to a very basic division of the state of being awake into wisdom and compassion. So wisdom would be the scale of what level of realization do they have. Compassion would be what, like on the scale of how many qualities they have. They all fall under this broad category of compassion. So there what we're seeing is they're articulating that perhaps in a way you can think of realization as but realization as pertaining to how clearly are you seeing with regards to the truth of things. And then on the other hand, how many skills have you learned that you can use to help others? So that's what we're talking about when we say qualities. How much qualities have you developed? So here it suggests that it sees a tension between that one doesn't automatically lead to the other. Meaning, just because you see very clearly the truth of any situation doesn't mean you have the skill or the ability to then use what you see in order to help others become free. Likewise, you might think you have ways of helping others, but if you're not seeing clearly your qualities in helping others cannot in the end lead them out of the darkness. So these two have to be cultivated simultaneously. So Mahayana people will, of course, in coming up with this, say a bodhisattva's scale takes into consideration these two. Whereas they will say that the arhat's scale only measures what? Only measures what, if you have to guess? Realization. That the arhat scale does downplays, if not outright ignores, the quality scale. So that's when, now it's not specific to Drigong, not specific to Jigten Sumgon, okay? Just in general. In general, it says, the Mahayana take on things is they say, although the arhat stream entrant, which is the first of the 4 stages of the sravaka scale, although the stream entrance realization may be equal to the bodhisattva's realization at the 6th bodhisattva scale, 6th level of the bodhisattva scale, in terms of realization. Yeah? The bodhisattva at the 1st level, although the realization is clearly then, right, lower than the stream entrance realization, however, the qualities involved in the 1st level of bodhisattva outshines the arhat. Qualities outshine the arhats. Yes, Judy.
It seems, I'm not sure I understand, if you have the realization and the true understanding, why compassion is
Well,
not.
that's what it's saying. It's not something to understand or not understand.
Yep.
This is what it's telling us.
Right, but how can you
that you cannot assume.
But I don't get why you can't assume if someone has greater knowledge that they are not, compassion is not part of that.
I'm saying,
I mean, I hear what you're saying, but
yeah.
I don't see how you can have great knowledge. I can see how you can have some kind of compassion without knowledge.
Oh, a lot of knowledgeable people.
But I'm not talking about knowledge as in knowing things. I'm talking about the knowledge that you're talking about.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. But like I said, in the end, these are people trying to make a point. Are we really debating whether arhats have it or don't have it? No. This is about what is the take-home lesson. Yeah, this is about what is the take-home lesson for me. Are we really debating, well, Ananda, come on. What level are you on compared to Avalokiteshvara? We're not really talking about that, are we? At least I don't think so. Yeah, this is really talking about what is the take-home lesson here? Why are they talking like this? Well, one reason why they might be talking like this, they, as in these Mahayana people, right? They're the ones who are making this. Why are they talking like that? Well, in part is because by the time of Nalanda, they're committed to not throwing one element out and say, they're just wrong, right? They didn't take the route that say, Hinayana people, they're just wrong. Forget about them. We only want to talk about Mahayana. So they want to bring in earlier disagreements. So one reason you can say it's totally historical, it's totally about figuring out how to harmonize everything. So that's one level. You can say that's why they're talking like this. But again, to me, that's a nice thing to know about what happened in the past. Seems reasonable. Seems like, reasonable doesn't mean like celebratory, like reasonable given the context, fine. But more important for us, I always say, how can we also understand what's going on here beyond They're trying to reconcile differences so that everybody agrees. Beyond that, it would be, what are they saying to us? What they're saying to us is, given that both are important, given that both has to be cultivated together, be careful. Be more careful about knowing too much, caring too little. Ultimately, that's where they want to draw the line. So, Judy, you don't need to understand, like, oh, how do I reconcile? Because just assume that that is already reconciled. As you say, if it is truly the kind of wisdom that is Buddha wisdom, of course it will lead to compassion. But we're not there. Where we are is we're trying to develop these two things. And as we're trying to balance these two things, it's actually saying, by putting it in this way, it's actually saying to me, be careful that when you are working on this, that it is much better if you're going to err on one side. It says to err on the side of caring, because that outshines everything, even the so-called wisdom. All your clear seeing amounts to nothing if it doesn't give rise to qualities that makes you good for yourself and others. Yeah. Good is not just about good for yourself, but good for, or just good for others, but good for yourself and others. Those qualities are good for yourself and others. How often we think we see so much, and then we become incapacitated by what we see. Today, so much information. We think we see so much. The more we see, the more we suffer. So all that seeing leads to no qualities. So here, quality is not just any quality. It says that the moment you give rise to bodhicitta, know that you have already outshined, so to say, even a very clear-seeing person over there, that you can call a stream entrant, you can call whatever. One of the Kadampa masters, a quote that I came across a while back, it says, it says, something like, more important than a learned teacher is a disciplined teacher. Do teachers need to be learned? Yes, of course. Otherwise, how can they teach us? Do they need to be disciplined? Otherwise, yes. Otherwise, it's all just talk, But again, where we are, as we walk around and, going about our lives, it's not always these, you run into people with these two exactly matching. And if you have to choose, then it's telling us, actually go for the one that is disciplined. Even if, the one that is brighter might be what, initially attracts us. But at the end of the day, no matter how bright, if that doesn't actually turn into discipline, as in the disciplined conduct the qualities in the conduct, then not very useful. Not very useful. To me, this is what this is saying. Yeah? I mean, without getting into, I find it funny, to me, my very kind of limited, ability to appreciate some of these more esoteric debates that these kempos and geishas and doctors and philosophers have. Which level is which level? Which level is which level? Do arhats really have this? Do pratyekabuddhas really have that? Do bodhisattvas on the first ground really have that, or not really have that, and this and that? I was like, I don't know, right? But based on the way that they are talking, what is it telling me? So, bottom of 355 in the notes for 415. So Selvage says, the Rinjangma summarizes the meaning of this passage. So they quoted a passage from the Dashabhumika Sutra by introducing the term Mahayana of family, referring to the fact that a bodhisattva who has first cultivated the resolve, bodhicitta, who have first cultivated the resolve, already outshines sravakas and pratyekabuddhas by family. By family means, that by those qualities. Thus, up to and including the sixth stage, the possessors of the realization are different due to their qualities, but not due to their realization. Rinchen Chanchup further points out that some possessors of realization may have a realization, but not a single quality. So he says that, right? So in answering your question, Judy, it's like, well, I don't know why, doesn't matter actually why. It's like, okay, what's the take-home lesson here, right? So it's possible that they have not a single quality, which is only a cause for faults and defects. On the other hand, if a possessor of realization has perfected both his own benefit and that of others, and possesses immeasurable qualities, this is a cause of purity that is difficult to transcend. Thus, because different types of owners can possess one and the same realization, the vehicles are up to the sixth stage not distinguished by realization, and similarly, since they possess vast or few qualities, the families are distinguished, meaning are distinguished on the basis of qualities. Therefore, realization must be adorned with qualities, and that is the take-home lesson. It is not about truly and truly stream entrants with or without qualities. Truly and truly, non-returners with or without qualities. We are not talking about that, because that, in reality, no need to talk about it. If it is, it is. If it is not, it is not. But as teachings for us, groping in the dark, this is the important line. Therefore, realization must be adorned with qualities. It's a good guide. Yeah. When we think, oh, I have understood something. Oh, I have realized something. Right? Okay. You want to know how true that realization is? Don't ask. No need to ask your guru and this and that. Look and see if qualities have arisen from that realization. If qualities have not been produced as a result of your realization, it's not a realization, it's another confusion. Now, conversely, which is not discussed here, conversely, if we think we have qualities, maybe they are, but because they are not sustained by true realization, you cannot sustain it. It cannot be sustained, those qualities. So that's another way, I think, of understanding this relationship between qualities and realization. So you can be kind, you can be gentle, you can be patient, but if it is not ultimately based on realization, one of these days it will be derailed and you'll give up. Like Shariputra, meeting the guy without an eye and the guy without an arm. You will be derailed. So both are important. Overall, the tendency, and so this again, against this background, the tendency in the Buddhist tradition overall is to emphasize realization. Because so much of where suffering comes from is confusion, right? And therefore realization is always so important. So it's very interesting to see here, that it says actually at the end of the day, so to say, because it's so easy to trick yourself into thinking you have realization, then ironically, the way to measure realization is to look at qualities. And this is certainly, not, I would say, not what you're going to hear if a more traditionally schooled Tibetan teacher is teaching this. I think they do take it very literally, like, oh yes, And then, Judy, then you would have to force them to explain to you, well, how can it be, that an arhat with correct realization wouldn't give rise to qualities. If you want to take it literally, that indeed we're talking about arhats, okay? Well then, yeah, you'll need to account for all of that. Yeah, when I hear people talking like that, I have exactly your same thing, with Judy, as you express. I just like, no, I cannot accept that. That doesn't make any sense. That if it is authentic realization, how will it not carry qualities? Yeah, I too cannot. Therefore, I don't read it that way. I read it as, what does this mean for where I'm standing, And at the end, I would say, so this is a bigger point about how do we interpret scripture, To put it sort of like in Christian terms, right? We got to be careful that we're not interpreting scripture as if we're saying, I know what God wants. Then you are turning into God, which is a sin. But rather to say, in understanding scripture in this way, I believe it will make me a better person. Then God will not fault you. As to whether you exactly understand what God is saying or not. So 416, the view of Cittamatra reaches as far as the realization of the seventh stage. So this is very clearly also connected to, again, Captain Compassion, right? We've also looked at this already. So again, in one place, in one context, Cittamatra does refer to a particular philosophical tradition in Indian Mahayana Buddhism. But again, Kyopa Rinpoche is not interested in that category of Cittamatra, but rather he's interested more in the context of when you practice the path up to a certain point, you will achieve this realization that everything that you experience is experienced through mind and is the experiencing of what the mind projects. And when you have truly realized that, you are at the 7th of the 10 bodhisattva levels. And in terms of that, relating to the stories of Captain Compassion and the Brahmin boy who gave up his vow on celibacy, it said that both of them, because they have achieved the 7th stage, they have therefore become strong enough to withstand whatever negativity that might arise from having acted less than perfect. Because they have reached this level of understanding, level of realization. And so with regards to them, to people with that level of strength, that level of realization, that level of understanding, then the Buddha says, yeah, of course, you have to do difficult deeds. Before you're at that level, do the easier deeds so that you do not jeopardize reaching the goal of Buddhahood. So this is related to, even to, somebody asked me, so back to this issue about Donglen, to take on the suffering of others and to give them your happiness. If ultimately, right, we also understand that you cannot take, like literally take away someone's suffering and give it to yourself, right? Like the idea of taking away suffering literally and give it to yourself. Yeah. That thought, right? That idea, if you think a little bit more about that, it's based on the idea of if there's a debt, someone has to pay it. Right? If there's a debt, someone has to pay it. Should May pay it? Should Han pay it? Well, it's May's debt, Why should Han pay? Well, unless Han is really kind. So Han says, okay, here, May, give me your, your I don't know, the sheet, your contract. I will assume your debt. So in that system of understanding cause and effect, right, the transaction involves somebody giving out these loans. And those loans are never forgivable. Either the original person who took out the loan needs to pay the debt, or that debt can be transferred to someone. So that is really a theistic understanding of what karma is. In that sense, of a debt, that someone has to assume that debt. Then we say, oh, no, this is not how it works. So therefore, I cannot assume the debt because it's not so much about that I take away like May's debt and put it on myself. But that in practicing Donglen, what we're doing is we are using these occasions of suffering to train and to purify our own stuff. So So when I imagine, taking other people's suffering, I know that I'm not actually taking their suffering. But if in the process of doing that meditation, I start to suffer, I need to understand this is the ripening of my own negative causes. So Kyopa Rinpoche would agree, He says, yes, that's what's going on. Therefore, be careful in the same way about, these bodhisattva levels. Be careful that you don't prematurely cause the ripening of your negative karma that you cannot handle. Be careful. So when he says, be careful when you do Tonglen, he's not saying for sure you'll run into this problem, but he is saying, like, even someone as great as Pamodrupa, he was always sick because he did a lot of Tonglen. But of course, for Pamodrupa, it wasn't a problem. Just like Captain Compassion burning in hell wasn't a problem. But Kyopa Rinpoche is saying, but the rest of you, don't take this lightly. Don't think that, it's not really assuming May's debt when I say, May, let me take the debt off your hands. It's not really. And therefore, it's okay. Then you go about saying to everyone, hey, give me your debt, give me your debt, give me your debt, give me your debt. And you're like, I never signed any papers. It says, be careful, don't think like that, Because in the first place, it has to be genuine when you say, May, let me take your debt. It has to be genuine. It cannot just be, can I take your debt? Not really, I'm just doing it to train myself. It has to be genuine, as in, no, I really, I will, So you want me to sign papers? Sure, let's sign papers. It has to be sincere like that. But in all of that, Kyopa Rinpoche is saying, you need to be careful. Okay, now, at the level that I am, I will say, well, sometimes if I'm too careful, I will never learn anything. That's also true, right? I think about how Asian parents raise their kids, so careful. So the kids are relatively, takes longer to be mature. His Holiness always says this about Indian parents. He said, they coddle their kids too much. And every decision is made for them, and they will never really learn to make decisions. And he says, it's good the Tibetans who live in the West, hopefully they don't learn in the West. So he says, you should let them, sort of like your job as a parent is to, of course, to protect them, but don't protect them to the point of them not being able to make decisions and to learn from their decisions. So likewise, I think, you take to heart, Kyopa Rinpoche is saying, Tonglen, be careful. But to me, it doesn't mean, don't do Tonglen, don't do Tonglen. But it is a good kind of balancing of, how, on the other hand, people are like, Tonglen, everything Tonglen, Again, I have seen, like whether explicitly or not so explicitly, especially in the West, because of the image of the suffering Christ, people secretly hopeful, wish that they can be the suffering Christ. But that's a very different understanding, So then you want to be superhero. You want to be like Jesus Christ, you know. And then you take on people's suffering, and then you become depressed. Right? It becomes too heavy. Many of us, you know, experience this by, you know, looking at all the suffering in the world, and then feeling discouraged. And then you cannot stop looking because you feel like if you stop looking, you might turn stone cold. So then you keep looking, you know. Then you keep looking, and then you keep suffering. Then when you keep suffering, you think, oh, yes, you know, I'm now a bodhisattva. Oh, no. You're just taking on debt that you have no ability to clear, and you're not helping anyone. Related to this, very auspiciously, Khenchen Rinpoche chose for this coming Saturday's teaching a translation called The Play of Elephants. It's called, the teaching itself doesn't talk at all about elephants. So it's a classical reference. Maybe Rinpoche will explain. But the title is called A Treatise on Compassion, The Play of Elephants. So from the text itself, it's not clear. What about elephants? But there, it's about compassion. And it goes into details about what is and isn't compassion. It says, you know, there is egocentric compassion. And then when I read that section, I feel like, oh, that's what most of us are doing. Egocentric compassion. Of course, it's a subtle egocentric, but nonetheless egocentric. That a lot of the times, the compassion that we think that we're engaging in is really a subtle form of pleasing the ego. So, Rinpoche, then and therefore there will be suffering. In another way of putting it, this is more like that idea, you know, that or the warning, like, you know, like the literal meaning of compassion is to suffer with, and a lot of times that's what we're doing. We suffer with. And some of us need that because if we don't feel like we're suffering with others, we feel like, oh, I'm being a jerk. But see, the not wanting to be a jerk is again grounded in ego, not really grounded in becoming free. And so anyway, this Saturday. Statement 17. One actualizes the absence of a self or phenomena on the 8th stage. So here, first, in Mahayana systems of explaining selflessness or emptiness, the two emptiness or the two selflessness, there is the selflessness of persons and the selflessness of phenomena. So in Mahayana explanations, they say, whereas in the Hinayana system, they can overcome selflessness, they can overcome the mistaken belief of the self in relation to persons. They don't even recognize that there is a more subtle level of self, which is imputing self on impersonal elements, i.e. phenomena. Again, this is sort of Mahayana criticism of Hinayana in terms of realization. And they say this Hinayana realization, yes, it can get you to be free from imputing self onto persons, but their seeing is not subtle enough to see that beyond the problem of imputing self onto persons, there is a more subtle level of imputing self, which is to impute self onto impersonal factors, such as the aggregates, such as the six senses, such as the six sense objects, and so on and so forth. So here, the self of phenomena is the more subtle of the two. So here, Kyoba Rinpoche says, on the eighth bhumi, the realization of the absence of a self with regards to phenomena is achieved. And what do other people say? People claim that one realizes both selflessnesses on the first stage. So apparently there were some who said, even on the first stage of bodhisattva, which in the system of the five paths is called the path of seeing. At that first stage, both selflessness, both the self of persons and the imputing of self on persons and the imputing of self or the projection of self onto phenomena, these two are overcome at the first stage. Kyoba Rinpoche said, no, it's on the eighth stage. Why? It is not necessary to explain this in detail. Okay, good luck. Briefly, the absence of a self of the person is actualized on the first stage. But it is not until the eighth that you will realize the absence of a self with regards to phenomena. So he quotes the Lankavatara. And then he quotes another text, a tantra, a Guhya Tantra. The discussion of the topic of realization of the absence of a self of phenomena on the first stage refers to the first of the three pure stages, namely the eighth. Others say that the realization of the absence of self of phenomena occurs on the first completely joyous stage, but this is not the case. So here, all Chodra is doing is he's just saying, this is just how it is. I don't see him using like reasoning. Yeah. It's just quoting. So to me, it's basically saying, well, this is just how it is. Okay. So we'll have to look at the notes and see if Sobish offers us a little bit more. Yeah. The Dorshema specifies the general view by stating that since all phenomena summarized as subject and object are without arising, abiding, and cessation, the realization that renders object an object possessor, in other words, subject, the realization that renders object and subject inseparable is the realization of the selflessness of phenomena. According to Arya Maitreya, this fact is realized on the first bodhisattva stage, while Arya Nagarjuna teaches that one realizes it on the eighth stage. Yeah, so now Sobish gives us some background, saying that in Madhyamaka sources, following Nagarjuna, Nagarjuna says, selflessness of phenomena isn't, you're not capable of understanding selflessness of phenomena until you reach the eighth bodhisattva bhumi. But apparently, according to Maitreya, in the Cittamatra system, it says that at the first stage, you are already capable of realizing, and you have already realized the selflessness of phenomena. So the Dorshema, the earliest commentary on the Gongchik, is aware of this discrepancy. So it points this out. So continuing from Dorshema, according to Maitreya, this fact is realized on the first bodhisattva, and according to Nagarjuna, this is realized on the eighth. Therefore, they contradict each other. Dorje Sherab also explains why some people hold that one realizes the selflessness of phenomena on the first stage, which is, and Dorshema says, the teaching by Maitreya that one realizes both selflessness on the first stage denotes the Kumara Bhumi, since the first stage for Bodhisattva Kumara Buddha was the eighth stage. So now, right? Now, Dorshema is offering an explanation for why Maitreya says the first stage. Here he is offering like more like evidence to say, actually, Maitreya is not saying first stage as in the first bodhisattva stage, but the first stage in a more specific sense, which is actually the eighth stage. Okay, now, right, what we're seeing is like, again, people are trying to harmonize all the differences. So for me, again, like, is it really or not really? I say, don't worry about that. Beside the point. Can we get some take-home lesson out of this? Let's see. Okay, so continue. Furthermore, Dorje Sherab says that the eighth is sometimes called the first. Why? Because it is the first of the pure stages. So in the 10 stages of bodhisattvas, they are sometimes divided into the impure stages and the pure stages. So in that explanation, they say, before we even arrive at the first bodhisattva stage, our experience is all impure. Meaning, here pure and impure is about whether there are obscurations or no obscurations. So before we even arrive at the first bhumi, first bodhisattva stage, is all afflicted. Then, when we achieve the first level, it is a mix of afflicted and not afflicted. All the way to 7. There is a mix of afflicted and non-afflicted. Of course, between 1 and 7, the afflicted becomes less and less. The non-afflicted becomes more and more until the 7th. But it is at the 8th where all afflicted are gone and only non-afflicted, and therefore it's called pure. So then when it says the first, it's almost like what this explanation is trying to provide is like, it's actually the first, in parenthesis, pure stage. And this is how the first and the 8th can be the same thing. So they're trying to harmonize what Maitreya is saying and what Nagarjuna is saying. And saying they both agree. Dorje Sherab also quotes the passage from Vikurvana Sutra. He taught, from the moment I realized the selflessness of phenomena, I perceived the Buddha. Query, question, is there no perception of him up to the 7th stage? During the 2 intermediate immeasurable eons? Reply, up to that point, one perceives only his perishable collections. So in this sutra, someone said, when I realized selflessness of phenomena, that was when I could see the Buddha directly. Then the questioner says, oh, So you mean like up to the seventh stage, you didn't see the Buddha directly? Then the answer is, I only saw his perishable collections, meaning I only saw his physical form. I did not see the essence form. And here the quote is showing how the realization of selflessness of phenomena is only achieved on the eighth stage. Like Chokidrakpa, Dorje Sherab states that the Dipankara Sutra teaches the actualization of the selflessness of phenomena on the eighth stage. The passage in question links the attainment of the realization of the selflessness of phenomena to the attainment of the acceptance of the fact that phenomena have no origin, which only occurs on the eighth stage. Dorje Sherab quotes Jigten Sumgun. At the time when one is strewn with 5 Utpala flowers by the glorious exalted Lord Dipankara, one comes to realization of the selflessness of phenomena which are without origination. Thereby, from then on, one directly beholds the Buddha's countenance, the Buddha's true, like the Buddha's face. So here is talking about the essence of Buddha. And Dorje Sherab continues, the realization that there is no own nature, no self-nature in all phenomena of samsara and nirvana, and they have never existed from the beginning, is called the realization of all phenomena as sameness. Well, the realization of the sameness of all phenomena. Since it is inseparable from that realization, the spontaneous arising of the resolve for awakening that benefits sentient beings is called absolute resolve for awakening. It is also called selflessness of phenomena. They are taught to be actualized on the eighth stage. So absolute bodhicitta, absolute resolve for awakening, is only realized on the eighth bhumi. So here, in conclusion, we don't know what the take-home lesson is. Except that, like all we are told, both by the Sobish's notes and in the commentary, is like, no need to explain so much. But bottom line is, selflessness of phenomena not achieved until the eighth stage. But there has to be some kind of take-home lesson, really. It's not obvious. So one of these days, one of you might have an aha moment. Please share when you have an aha moment. I suspect it is somewhat related to how on the eighth bhumi, when the bodhisattva is said to no longer fall back into confusion, and has also like manifested Buddha qualities. And that is related to something like that over there on that level. I'm sure it could not be that Kyoba Rinpoche was just wanting to settle a kind of debate of categories. So this, both the commentary and the notes, to me, only allows us to see it in terms of he's settling a debate, a dispute about how you categorize things. But as I said, I think always the Gongchik, there's something deeper going on that is beyond which box do you put it into in the boxes to organize things. There's something, and I'm not seeing what it is for statement 17. Any thoughts? Any speculations? Any hunches? Leonard?
I think for me, all of this, I mean, irrespective of whether level 1 equals level 8 in these systems, the thing that I keep coming back to is the need to be humble about
Mm-hmm.
where we think we are.
Mm-hmm.
That we're really, we can think we have all this knowledge and all this,
Yes.
but we really don't. We're still struggling with even getting to a first level, so to speak.
Yes. Getting up in the morning and putting on pants.
That's about it, is sometimes what I can do.
And do the dishes.
Oh, yes. And do the dishes. And if
And
you're
cook
running out of
breakfast.
dishes to do, I have some for you to practice bodhisattva activities.
Dr. Lai,
Yes.
back to the start. The main characteristic of an arhat,
Mm-hmm.
my understanding, is that that's a person who's free of afflictive emotions.
Yes.
So you can be free of those emotions, but you don't necessarily care about anybody else.
According to the Mahayana party line, yes.
Right. And the arhat is wise enough or is on the right path to eliminate his own afflictive emotions,
Yes.
but he may or may not have compassion
Yes.
and bodhicitta.
Yes.
Right. So the Mahayana way of looking at it is you can go so far, but you're not going to be on the path to Buddhahood unless
Yes.
you're free of afflictive emotion.
Yes.
And you start to develop these other qualities, which have
Yes.
to do with caring about other people.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah. Mm. Somebody on Facebook shared somebody who's in the field of mental health, but also a Buddhist practitioner shared an article of some study. I don't know, like, the strength of the study, and I'm not able to judge like the news source, but it was shared by someone who is in mental health, so it's good enough. But it says that in one study, I browsed through it, I kind of glanced through it, and it seems like it's not a small study. It has a good number. And the study said that they have found. Yeah, let me read you the. Of course, the title of the article is always just very bombastic these days. All news. You put a big. You have to read the details. So anyway, this one says. It's in the Psych News Daily. It says, this is taking a long time to open. It says, the title, study links some form of spiritual training to narcissism and spiritual superiority. A new study has found that some popular forms of spiritual training, such as energy healing, aura reading, and to a lesser degree, mindfulness and meditation, correlate with both narcissism and spiritual superiority. Yeah, it's like, yeah, I can believe that. You know, it goes on to say, an implicit feature of spiritual training is that it allows its adherents to distance themselves from their egos and thereby from things such as the need for social approval or success. By encouraging self-compassion and non-judgmental self-acceptance, spiritual training should presumably make people less concerned with such things. But as a new paper explains, spiritual training may have the opposite effect. Namely, spiritual training might in fact enhance people's need to feel, quote, more successful, more respected, or more loved, unquote. So then it goes on to say, you know, how it's commonly expressed as, you know, I need to help, you know, can I help you in elevating your, you know, understanding, la, 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 and things like that. Yeah, you know, when I looked at that, I was like, yeah, of course, you know. And also then the other thing I noticed in there is like, so often, you know, these things, it's really the consumerization of these things, which is people, you know, believing that they can consume this on a pick and choose basis. So all these spiritual systems, so I'm a traditionalist, so that's my problem. All these, you know, traditional systems have over the years, over the centuries, over the millennium that they have existed, have built in checks and balances. Often, almost always, you know, when problems arise is when these checks and balances fall out of place. Yeah. So this narcissism, you know, is very easy. Yeah? Exactly when you don't have, you know, someone to keep you in check, or someone's to keep you in check. So as I've said, you know, as I've jokingly kind of mentioned before, you know, only two types of people absolutely don't care what other people think of them, right? Buddhists and jerks. So be very careful, you know, like, are you on your way to becoming Buddha, or are you just becoming a bigger jerk because you're practicing Dharma? Oh, it's like, I don't care what other people think of me. Yeah, for some of us, it's good not to care so much what other people think of us. But if we're not careful about that, you know, it can turn into just being a jerk. You think, oh, I'm being Milarepa. Yeah, so these days, you know, like when this have become like on the model of like taking courses through college, you know, pick and choose, right? You sign up for this and that, and then you don't even have a, you know, advisor. I remember, you know, when I was teaching college, you know, like the whole advisor business, for a long time for these students, it's all just kind of a chore because they are assigned, right? Because they don't know what their major is yet. So they're assigned an advisor. Then for the most part, frankly, you know, when I was one of those advisors, you know, I wasn't really advising because I have no clue what they really want. Of course, this is already based on the consumer model. It's what the customer wants. But even that, I have no idea what the customer wants. And the customer didn't care particularly to figure out what they want. So they just say, I want to take these classes. And you're like, oh, yeah, looks okay. Yeah, is it going to be a heavy load? Have you thought of that? Da, 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 But no one's really guiding, No one's really guiding. Until you get to the point of you have majored in something. But even when you have majored in something, and even a school, a small school like Warren Wilson or Davidson, part of it is because the customer is acting like a customer, the student. And so they don't want to be guided. And the other part is the one providing a service it's just like, well, whatever the customer wants, And now, spirituality in the modern spiritual marketplace has become that. It doesn't mean, absolutely it'll fail. It just means now the seekers, heavier responsibility for you to be honest with your own process. I'm not saying, that absolutely it won't work. But what I am saying is it could work, but really heavy responsibility on the seeker to be absolutely honest. And that's hard, Since now it's so hard to trust someone else, then you have to trust yourself. But it's so tricky to trust yourself. So just be very careful as you go figure out your own medicine. Anyway, we meet again on Wednesday morning, then Wednesday night, or Wednesday night for us in the Western Hemisphere, Thursday morning for others. The Drigong Dhammakirti Sangha will have the Sangha meeting. On Facebook, I already created a group that you can join. So you have to go to Facebook to look for that group. It's the Drigong Dhammakirti International Sangha. The group is visible, even if you're not a member. And then you have to request to join, and then I have to approve it. In some cases, you can join directly. It's a little bit mysterious. I think it all has to do with whether an invitation has been sent out or not. But I'm not like going through the list and deciding to send someone and not send someone. It's just in creating the group, just quickly, I just click some. So it has no meaning, whether you've been invited or not. It's more that I don't want to send an invitation to someone who is still unsure whether they want to be involved or not, and then feeling the pressure on my end. Oh, you have to join. Oh, no. I have no interest in selling this program. So it's like, oh, you want to become involved? Really? It's more like my attitude. Like, really? Are you sure? But I think the first few Wednesdays, I will live stream onto my Facebook page as well for other people. There's other people that might be interested. There's not doing this, that they might want to join. And about the commitment, is really making a real effort to attend these weekly meetings, Wednesday night or Thursday morning for some of you. And if you cannot do that, and there's many reasons why we can or cannot do it. But if you cannot do that, then it's a little, I don't know, maybe not completely meaningless, but it's a little not very meaningful if you cannot, the notion of Sangha coming together. And for that too, I want to say, I don't want to make it a rule, then it becomes too rigid. But I want to encourage, if you come to this Wednesday night, Thursday morning, I do want the camera to be turned on. I mean, that's Sangha, for us to see each other. But I'm not making it a rule. So again, don't stress over that. But I want to encourage you to step out of not being seen, so that it's a Sangha gathering. It's like we come to the temple, then you come with a temple with a bag over your head. I mean, you could, but you just, be a little bit, strange. So it's a Sangha, it's a community. It means, gathering, that once a week program. So I want to encourage, I'm not making it a rule. I want to encourage you, at least from time to time, if not all the time would be good, but to, and then of course that also means, you might be like, well, I don't know, there's lots of stuff going on, people walking around in my house, da da da. It's like, that's okay, Sight is not as distracting as sound, so I'm not saying turning on your microphone so that we can hear all the noises that is going on all around you, but visually to be able to see each other. I think it's an important element of being a gathering. Changchu Semcho Rinpoche Ma Ge Ba Nam Ge Gyurche Ge Ba Nyam Pa Me Pa Yang Gong Ne Gong Du Bel War Shu.
Buenos días. Gracias.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.